Hey, folks. Thanks for stopping by Kaiser's Castle. Take a seat on my big orange couch. Grab yourself a coffee, tea, soda, or adult libation. This show is being brought to you by today Old Smoky, Tennessee. Tennessee's Mango Habanero Whiskey. That's what I'm shooting down the hatch. I got Baz here today, and we're going to tell some funny tales. I saw a show. Ian from some gun show that's on the internet. He had found this gun that this guy built. He went to the National Firearms Museum in Leeds, and that was the museum that Baz was talking about. And anyways, this guy built this gun as a protest, showing that he was going to be a free man and you could build it out of everyday parts. He went to the hardware store, built it from magazine to gun. And the only thing he had to acquire was the bullets. And he test fired it and then took it down to the police station where they promptly arrested him. But here's the part of the story they didn't talk about. And I'll let Baz fill you in on that part right now. Go on, Baz, brother.
Cheers, brother. Thanks a lot. It's good. Again, it's good to be back on your big orange couch. I'm wearing a groove in it now, so I've been on it that often, but it's all good. So it's obviously some of the listeners might not know a bit about the sort of the firearms situation in the UK. And again, like the show will be called Clearing the Myth. There is a few myths circulating, usually on social media, that guns are actually illegal in the UK, which is completely and totally inaccurate and incorrect. Guns aren't illegal in the UK. We didn't ban guns, and guns are freely available. You can walk into a gun shop and you can buy a huge array of firearms. Obviously, there is a lot more restrictions that we've got over here than you guys have got over there on your side of the pond. But we'll touch on those as this sort of quick show goes on. Yeah, so this guy basically, I found out about him when I visited something called the National Firearms Centre in Leeds in the UK, in Northern England. And basically this place, its location is secret. It's protected by the Official Secrets Act, and it is basically the largest collection of firearms in the world. This place is a gun nut's wet dream. Gun nut like myself, I walked in there and instantly it was just, Jesus Christ, I'm in heaven. I mean, the first thing you see when you walk in is a minigun, a Dushka, and the vast array of belt-fed machine guns from day one, from the old Gatling gun to all the way up until modern day miniguns, the works basically. And then everything, it's like a supermarket but for guns. And it's basically a private collection but nationally owned. And to get into this place, you have to either be serving military, certain police forces, as in counter-terror, special firearms officers, national criminal intelligence agencies. You have to be certain government agencies like MI5, MI6, or the only sort of real quote-unquote civilians are allowed in there are actually certified researchers and historians. But to get them in there takes months and months and months of sort of paperwork, emails backwards and forwards. But I was quite lucky enough, being in the military, that we could basically ring up one morning and say, can we pop in this afternoon? And the lady that runs the actual the tour of the place would be like, yeah, pop in. She's I won't mention her name because again it's under the Official Secret Act, but she's a real knowledgeable person and she takes great pride in her work, and she's got one of those jobs where anybody like me or you, brother, would love to do. We'd do it free of charge. We'd pay to do the job, just so you can get eyes and hands on some of these iconic and historic firearms. And again, I've touched on a few firearms that were in there, like Sergeant Major Plumley's AK-47 he picked up and handed across to the ops officer. It has Uday Hussein's son's Golden AK, the Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, Pig Iron revolvers, some of the Colt peacemakers that Samuel Colt made for the current US president, and just iconic firearms like that. But to go into this story, there's also a section of the museum that are sort of unique, we'll put it that way, firearms, basically what people have made, that people made in prisons, that people have made in the backyard. And some of these are actually ingenious, how people have made them out of just everyday shit that they've picked up. They've gone into the garage, the workshop, the shed, picked up a load of shit and made a actually fully functioning, safe firearm. Usually revolving around firing shotgun shells or slugs. But then there's the odd let's put it, sort of gun nut who's quite unique, usually has some engineering skill, like this gentleman that we're going to be talking about, that made his own firearms. Yeah, and like you said, the story, he made this. Go on, brother.
The show that they were on is called Forgotten Weapons. Ian's the guys who hosted it, and it was on Improvised and Craft produced Firearms. And so that's what's unique, and I just couldn't remember the guy's name, so I just wanted to bring up the show. You guys can find it on YouTube. And the name of the gun that guy made was called a, give me 1 second, because I saw it up here when I pulled it, P.A. Lutzie's SMG. So that's the show that we're referring to, and that's the machine gun I was talking about. Go on, brother. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, it's okay, brother. Yeah, so this guy, he basically knocked up a submachine gun in his garage, out of parts that he'd knocked up. Obviously, he'd gone to like a hardware store, like we've got a hardware store over here called B&Q, and it's like a huge sort of hardware store. Everything that you need to build anything is found in one of these things, from power tools for copper piping to wallpaper to, timber, everything. So basically, he'd gone back to his workshop, knocked up this SMG, test fired it in his back garden, because again, we can get bullets over here, we can get firearms over here, So he got hold of some bullets and test fired it in his back garden. Walked down to the local police station, walked into the police station there, and the coppers promptly arrested him for owning a Type 1 firearm without a license, and he was actually trialed and sent to prison. Also because this guy's quite stubborn. He's like, right, this is a hobby, you can't stop me from doing it, I'm a free citizen. He went home and then promptly made a belt-fed machine gun, and it did take him a bit longer, and he did have some teething issues with it, and he did say he fired it once and he won't be firing it again, just because of the cartridge size and head spacing and all that good stuff. It was quite difficult to get just by using tools from a local hardware store. So again, he went to the police station, handed this weapon in. The police are like, what the fuck is going on here? He's not a belt-fed machine gun. Again, he was in front of the judge, and this sort of kept going on for quite a period of time until the judge, who kept having to sort of take his trial on, was just like, right, this guy is tenacious. He's just not going to fucking stop doing it. I can't keep jailing him because he's getting on in years. You know what I mean? He's not going to learn his lesson, and we're not going to jail him for life. So how do we get around this story? So basically what they did, and it's sort of not very well publicised, and that's why I'm not going to mention names or where he's actually from and yada, yada, yada. But basically they got the police commissioner of his county involved, the judge, and they sat down and said, look, what we're going to do is, because you're not going to stop doing this, we're going to grant you a sort of probationary and temporary gun manufacturer's license, under the guise that the local constabulary can basically come and check your workshop, check your home at any given point without notice, to ensure that you aren't stashing fucking an armory of machine guns, So that's sort of like quite a funny tale. That's not very well publicised, obviously, because of obviously reasons. But the again, it's just another one of those quaint sort of British laws that sometimes common sense does prevail, and if they're kept on the quiet, then things do happen. It's not publicised that often. And some of the weapons that he's actually manufactured, I've actually seen some and held some, and especially the smaller sort of like the SMGs and stuff like that, are pretty fucking well manufactured. You know, if you held one in your hand and held an actual industry manufactured submachine gun, it's quite difficult to tell the difference, apart from the stampings and the markings and things like that, and obviously some of the furniture on the weapons themselves. But again, when we took them into the range and we fired a couple off, there's no difference. That they shoot almost as good as a normal SMG, obviously, because it's not a larger caliber round with higher pressures. So it's quite an interesting place. But again, I wish more people could go to the Firearms Centre, because it is a gun nuts wet dream. Any Second Amendment abiding and loving American citizen would love that place, because just the history of the place. It's got patent firearms in there, like the very first Lee Enfield, the very first Bombess. You know what I mean? The like old muskets and stuff like that they've still got the wax stamp on from patent stamping. And again, this some of these rifles are older than the United States themselves. If you know, that's the history of this place. I could go on for hours and hours about this National Firearms Centre and some of the weapons in there, but I just don't have the time, to be honest.
There's one thing they brought up, and they showed a couple examples of it. I guess it was not a hard time for the provisional IRA to get, factory built guns during that time. So the people that weren't Catholic, or vice versa, I don't know which side that is. But I believe it was the people that weren't Catholic. They started building revenge guns, and
the Protestants, the Loyalists.
Yes.
I'll just to summarise for the people that don't know, the conflict in Northern Ireland was primarily a religious thing. There was the Republicans, the Catholics, which are the IRA, that wanted a united Ireland, and then there was the Loyalists, which are the Protestants, that were loyal to coming under the United Kingdom, you know what I mean, that swore allegiance to the Queen. They're the Loyalists, and they were sort of like the poorer cousins, even though they had more political power because they were Loyalists and governed from the UK, as Northern Ireland is. But they didn't have the actual support funds and armament. So a lot of the Loyalist terror groups, like the UVF, the Ulster Volunteer Force, the LVF, the Loyalist Volunteer Force, UFF with the Ulster Freedom Fighters and the Red Hand Commandos, basically looked to people like that to manufacture firearms that could be used in revenge killings and such. But again, they could get their hands on weapons, and there is actually weapons still out there. The ceasefire and the sort of amnesty was sort of a tongue-in-cheek, face value thing. There's still oil drums full of firearms all dotted all over Northern Ireland and on the border of Southern Ireland as well. So
they were.
So go on, brother.
They were touching on, since they couldn't get the weapons flow that the IRA could, what they would do is people who were machinists and shit like that, and they put together some nice weapons. And the way that this one weapon got caught was that they actually had somebody build an industrial muffler for some company. But they ordered a whole shitload of them. Well, once one of those mufflers were found on a gun, they retraced the mailing on it, right? Where did it come from? And it came from the U.S., where the mufflers were built. Well, that muffler was actually their suppressor on the firearm. So that's how that got undone. But, they're matter of fact in that video saying that those weapons still are out there. This is just an example. And, like they said, there was people, especially the new invasion horde that you guys are facing. They're getting these Makarov clones, and they're built to like fire tear gas or blank, rounds. And what they'll do is they'll just put a barrel on it, even though Makarov's an attached, barrel. How the Makarov's built. They'll put a new barrel on it, weld it to that attachment point, and then now they have a firearm. And functionally, it'll fire a 9x18 round. And it was just amazing, some of the stuff. They had a printed gun. They had a gun that was basically a match gun. And they had this slam fire, single shot shotgun somebody built. the accuracy of that would be dubious at best. But go on and rant a little bit more about the improvised and craft produced weapons that you saw, even in you know during the troubles of Ireland.
Yeah. So I mean, the IRA basically were masters at the craft. They're still to this day classed as one of the best terror organisations on the planet. At the time, at the height of the Troubles, nobody could come near them. I mean, I've touched on it before on other shows. We're still finding sort of legacy drills and manufacturing techniques in places like Syria, Afghanistan, Iraq, and anywhere there's this sort of terrorism is the main threat. We're still seeing legacy, let's say, legacy techniques that the IRA founded and invented, and then obviously went to Libya to teach those people, and it's just spread from there. The very cunning people, all their bomb makers, the IRA's bomb makers, were basically educated in the Queen's Own University in Belfast, all chemists and things like that, so they knew what they're doing. And just all their bombs were made out of ammonium nitrate of fuel oil or sugar and things like that. But they were bringing entire city blocks down, you know. And then some of the weapons that they were using against us, the British Army, things called prigs. I can't actually remember. I've just done a mind dump there. Basically, it was a homemade bazooka. You know what I mean? And do you have digestive biscuits in the States?
No, we don't.
No. Basically, it's like an oatmeal biscuit. And what they used for tamping was they made this sort of EFP, this homemade EFP, in this bazooka, but for the tamping at the back, to dampen the blast, they were putting packs of biscuits, oatmeal biscuits, and these could be shoulder launched, or they could be mounted on top of something, like strapped down with plastic cuffs and launched by either pressure plate or by command wire. So, and they used to put these sort of choke points that the security forces used to frequent. Again, because it wasn't just the British Army fighting against the IRA. You know what I mean? We did it for 6 to 9 months if you were on operations, or if you were posted there for up to 2 years. The police force in Northern Ireland, or back then the RUC, had to live and fight along. You know what I mean? This every day. So there were guys that were going through a lot of shit. There were guys that were getting kidnapped in front of their wives and children and shot and murdered and tortured. So it was just a fucking horrible place to be.
Well,
go on.
I had a picture my brother Blackie sent me years ago, and it was kind of funny, but it was kind of wrong the way it looked. There's a police station that actually had this fence that went all the way and even tilted up into the roof. And it was because they would launch mortars at the police station. And he explained that to me. He's like, yeah, man. He goes, they that's what that fencing's there for. But the picture, when he sent it to me, you know, it was a long distance call back then. You know, there was no, but right after the Gulf War, he was reposted, and he's Irish by birth, you know, and he served as a Royal Military Policeman. And of course, they would attach the RMP to the Royal Ulster Police, right? And he sent me that picture of, it might have been in Belfast, if memory serves. I got to find that picture. I'll post it on a future episode. But the way they put that chain link fencing going all the way up and in, I was like, you know, called him up. I'm like, what the hell is this picture? And there was a bunch of graffiti pictures he sent me, just all kinds of wild pictures from that time. And they were not ashamed. And he sent me pictures of both. Both sides would have like crossed M16s with their little, you know, unit or whatever designation they would paint on the walls.
Well, once the show's finished, brother, I'll send you. I've got hundreds on my phone of the murals from both sides, both the Republican and the Loyalist side, that you can use on future shows. It was a crazy place. The mortars you're on about were again homemade. They used to have one called the Mark 13, or it's more effectively known as the Barrack Buster. Basically, you know, the 90 kilogram tall gas bottles, butane gas bottles.
Yeah.
What they used to do is basically cut the top off one of those and just fill it with explosives. and then they used to mount it in the back of a flatbed pickup or something like that, park it up, obviously line it up with the police station or military base, and just launch this fucking. Obviously, with all the explosives in it, was a lot more than 90 kilogram. You're looking at about 200, 300 kilograms worth of explosive and steel, and they just launch it. It had an effective range of about 200 meters, but if once it hit something, it would just drop an entire tower block. These things, they were absolutely lethal. But luckily, there were very few and far between. You know what I mean? Because they were difficult to build, difficult to mount, difficult to aim, and the telltale sort of whump of one of these going off, you heard it for miles. So again, they were very sort of rarely used. But the smaller gas bottles, butane gas bottles to fire at us. They were just ingenious in the way that they actually combated the British Army. They're probably one of the most formidable and scary sort of opponents I've come up against in my entire military and beyond career. I'd go against the Taliban any day of the week, or Al Qaeda, rather than the IRA, because they're not stupid. You know what I mean? They don't have a death wish. They want to carry on terror, where the idiots what we're facing nowadays don't mind popping themselves off and painting side of your vehicle in their own intestines. You know what I mean? So that's that. To wrap that up, obviously the National Firearms Centre's got loads of these weapons in there, and I just wish, again, you have to hand any sort of electronic or recording devices in. Again, it's just a nondescript door in the middle of a town centre, which leads you into this massive place. There's also some other agencies that work in there, again, and it's all to do with forensics and things like that, and that a lot of organisations used from all over the world, including three-letter organisations from the United States. I did actually bump into a guy there from one of your three-letter organisations. I was like, what are you doing here? And he goes, we're constantly in this place because it's one of the most secure and one of the most sort of well-kitted places there is on the planet for what we need to be doing. So it's a real interesting place. But we can move on to sort of dispel some of the myths surrounding firearms in the UK, if you want, brother.
Well, I'll just give an example before we do that. One of the funniest examples is a friend. He's a local dude, former British military guy, and that's all I'll say. Baz knows who he is, and other people do. Anyways, this guy is great. He's an older gentleman, just Superman, super guy. His father died, and of course his father, you might want to mute. I hear crackers opening. That's what it sounds like, Baz.
Almost like.
Anyway,
I was messing with my jacket. It's Velcro on my jacket. I got caught opening my jacket. Talking about firearms and just putting my pants back
making you get wet, right? So, anyways, the point is, it's funny. His father died, and his father was in World War II. So he has to go back over to where he lives in England. Nondescript, not going to say. And anyway, so while he's over there, he's going through his dad's stuff, and he's like, oh, well, here's like 5 grenades. Didn't know Dad had these. And he finds a couple machine guns, and he's like, didn't know Dad had these. Puts them all in a box, takes them to the local police, going to turn them in, which caused the police station to shut down for about 6 hours. And during that time, they're talking with him. And he's like, guys, they had to call EOD, of course. And he's like, guys, I brought them over in a box, man. You guys could take them out and just blow them somewhere else. But they wanted to render safe in the police station. Anyways, or outside of it, I don't know how he didn't get into specifics on how they did it. They were probably too busy interviewing him for that to be the case. But, hey, don't worry about your noise now. I have a dog drinking out of a dog bowl right now, which I'm sure everybody's hearing him slop the water around. So that's a tasty little bit. But anywho, afterwards they were like, okay, go on, have a good day. Gave him a receipt for all the stuff he turned in. And that was it. But that's a rational policing agency. Over here in the U.S., unfortunately, If you were to find that with your father or your grandfather or some crap, you found some stuff like that and turned it into the police, the first thing you'd be doing is going to jail for possession of a machine gun and hand grenades. Even though you found it in your dead dad's, that's where it needed to go. Was if it was illegal, dad did that. It's not me, but that's where sins of the father can transfer to sins of the son. And it's just a bullshit thing, but it's just interesting how different capital S states handle certain things. While we have the freedom in the Second Amendment, our law enforcement's normally really irrational over stupid shit like that.
Yeah, I get it, and I think it depends where you are from. Like, I would dare say if something like that happened in, I don't know, in a very strong pro Second Amendment state, you know, maybe out in the sticks somewhere, the reaction wouldn't be as you know what I mean, outlandish than it would as sort of somewhere in New York or in California, something like that. And it's pretty much the same over here. If that happens sort of in the middle of London,
no, Baz.
You know what I mean? I would dare say, go on.
No, Baz. It's you're incorrect on that for over here, and here's why. First off, it's an NFA item, National Firearms Act item, that was not licensed. Let's say your dad had a license. Well, that's fine.
Yeah.
You call the police, and then you know, your dad's dead. You're either going to get it transferred to you and pay your tax stamp. See, this is the higaboo they have over here. It's a non-taxed gun, so it's an illegal gun, and the grenades are not taxed. So you would be arrested not on state charges, on federal charges. That would supersede. That's why I said capital S. The lowercase s state may not give a fuck. You know, Ohio, the sheriff's office, the guy may take it and say, we got it, we'll handle it, but they have to put that paperwork up to the feds. And at that point, they would say who had possession of it. And possession of a non-licensed machine gun or any other dangerous ordinance would be a federal crime, and you had possession of it. So it's a whole different ball game when you get into certain shit. And just like, let's say your dad had a short-barreled rifle or shotgun, and he tax stamped it and everything. Well, if you took it down to the police department, you took it out of his safe, took it down to the police department, you had possession of it. Even if you opened the safe, you had possession of it. So your duty is to call the police, have them come, grab it out of the state or out of the safe, take possession of it. The ATF would take possession of it through them, and then you could put in for your tax stamp to acquire those weapons, unless there is unless. They came up with a, I can't remember. It's not a curios and curators license. It's a trust, a family trust. So what you do is you would, let's say I owned an NFA item, which I don't, you know. If I owned an NFA item, I would have to annotate on a trust, it's a legal form, that my son can be around it or my wife. Here's how technical that law is. Because let's say ATF decided they want to do a surprise look at your gun, and it's legal. I mean, you have an NFA tax stamp, and you don't have a trust. You go down to the corner market. You are cleaning your gun. They decide to do the pop-in inspection, and your wife is in the living room, and on the table is that NFA gun taken apart, and you just went down to get milk. And you come back, well, your wife's going to be in handcuffs because at that point she had possession of an NFA-controlled weapon. So that's why they have that trust.
Yeah. Well, it's quite similar over here, that as in access to your firearms. Let's say, going onto that subject, over in the UK, you can own firearms legally. All you need to have is a firearms license. All that really is you fill out a form, you send it to the local firearms office. The firearms officer, there's usually a designated policeman, a police officer that that is sort of like in charge of all firearms licensing. You send it to him. What he does, he just does a background check on you, that you're not a fucking idiot and you haven't been done for like armed robbery and things like that, or you don't have a history of drugs or violent past. If you know what I mean, you haven't got those things on record. And once he does that, basically you pay a small fee. You send him a passport photograph, and then what he does, he comes out to actually visit your house. And what that's for, it's not just to see, you know what I mean, you face to face. They want to know where you're actually going to be storing these firearms, because again, they want it secured so it can't fall in the hands of children or people who are untrained on the firearm, and two, it's so people can't access the firearm for nefarious reasons. Let's say you've got a neighbour or a burglar comes into your house, knowing that you've got firearms, to steal that firearm. So again, there's sort of certain guidelines that they want you to abide by, like your gun safe has to be under 2 locks. The weapon itself has to be double locked, so it'll have to have either obviously in the safe, which is a lockable safe, or a gun cabinet, and then maybe a trigger lock or something like that. So they want that, and the gun safe itself has to be bolted to the floor and a supporting wall, so a solid brick wall. It can't be to a plasterboard wall, obviously. And that's pretty much all it takes to get a firearms license in the UK. There's no like wizardry, or you haven't got to give your ancestral past or anything like that. It's basically that. It can take probably a bit longer than it does in the States. It can take up to about 90 days. But after that, it's just basically you can get a firearm. And the firearms law over here is a bit different over there. Apart from Northern Ireland, we can't have a semi-automatic pistol like a Glock or a SIG or whatever, but we can own revolvers of up to any caliber, any caliber whatsoever. With our rifles, it's semi-automatic rifles up to a certain caliber, and then we can basically own a bolt-action rifle of any caliber we want, up to and including 50 cal, and depending on the use of the gun, beyond, again, it takes dispensation from the local law enforcement to say, why do you need a 20 caliber fucking anti-material rifle? And it's because of A, B, C, or D. But it's pretty straightforward to get a weapon over here. Like, we can get the shotguns, and again, in some places we can actually have some firearms that some of your guys over there might struggle to get, like short barrel rifles and such. Over here we don't really have carry laws as such. It's a bit strange. Most of the time they would like to have you open carry, because then it doesn't show there's nefarious deeds. Again, we don't have such a big gun culture over here. If you get stopped in London carrying a firearm under your jacket, there's going to be questions asked, and chances are you're going to be arrested. But if you're stopped from where I'm from, up in Yorkshire or somewhere like that, the police frequently see farmers walking around with hunting rifles over the shoulder, with shotguns, with you know what I mean. Slaughtermen carry the either a 44 or 357 to put bulls down and stuff like that. So again, depending on where you are, is dependent on how frequently you see firearms. And a lot of our firearms law came in pretty recently. I'm not talking like 50, 60 years ago. I'm talking sort of like early 90s. And it's all because of a school shooting that we had. And again, we've touched on this before. A school shooting in the States, I'm not saying that you've become desensitized to school shootings, but they happen with a lot more frequency than they did in the UK, and that's a cultural thing. It's not because of firearms, and we know that. Everybody who listens to the show know that firearms don't kill people. It's the person that does the killing.
It's not a cultural thing, because if it was, back when I went to high school and we still had guns in our pickup trucks for when we were going hunting before or after school, all the sheriff would say is it better stay in the truck, right? It's not.
And once you come out, it goes with you.
It's not a cultural. Yeah, exactly. You didn't come back into school if you left and went into the parking lot. And yes. Terry was very clear on that shit. But here's the point that I was trying to get to, was that it's not a cultural thing. It's because we've drugged all of our kids, so it's a pharmacy thing. Ritalin and all that shit. SSRIs are the cause, and nobody wants to ever talk about it, but it's every mass shooting. They has one thing in common. There's not one that's happened that didn't have this. SSRIs. And that's a fact. And ever since Klebold and his boy, the two idiots that shot up Columbine, every one of them since has been that. The others were mentally deranged people, but SSRIs, people on that are mentally deranged. So that's an issue. So it's not cultural as much as it is. I think societal in one methodology of thought. And what I'll say about that is where parents don't want to be parents. They don't want to raise their kids.
That's it. It's a big parenting issue where these kids have been given access to firearms, or they've been given firearms. But alongside that, it's not the fact that they've been given firearms, it's the fact that they haven't been mentally stable enough to be responsible enough to own firearms, purely because of the pharmaceutical fucking crutch that they're on. And because it's easier to drug a child than it is to parent a child, and obviously that's been an issue. Or they are actually mentally deranged people that do have mental issues, which was the case with the Dunblane killings over here, which is why we had a lot more gun laws come in, or firearms restrictions come in the early 90s, because of that fucking idiot. And he didn't walk into like high school and kill 13, 14-year-olds. He walked into a primary school, you know what I mean, where he was executing toddlers, like 3, 4-year-olds. You know what I mean? He walks into a nursery or a preschool, and he just started unloading magazines into toddlers, and it was sort of that went anywhere in the world that would be like, what the fuck is going on there? This bloke has just walked in and taken shotguns to toddlers. He ran out of bullets, and then he picked out his two Glocks, and started just dropping toddlers and shooting primary school children in the face and stuff like that, and the teachers. So that was like, no, that's enough. We do have right to self defense in the UK. Knives aren't fucking illegal, whatever you hear on Facebook, But I think it was so shocking. It was a push too far. We'd had Hungerford shootings, we'd had mass shootings in the UK, but since the firearms sort of laws have come in, we've had no mass shootings. Yes, people do get shot, you know what I mean, but they're not with registered firearms. His firearms were registered. This guy that went into the school and just started brassing up kids, and it was sort of that pushed it over the edge. Like, is there any requirement for people to be walking around with semi-automatic pistols?
That's typical, though, in all Western countries. Even Germany has gun laws. People who follow the laws are normally not going to be the people that do stupid shit.
Yes.
And that's the whole point, I guess, to the show. But you can't even stop a criminal. I mean, as we were talking about earlier, improvised and craft produced weapons. Those things, these things people need to understand can be even more deadly than the stuff people can get legally.
Mm.
And it's not the legal person you have to worry about. It's the criminal. Somebody with a criminal disparity. How else can a bank robber who's been convicted twice or 3 times acquire a gun? Well,
it's obviously through the black market, through, his contacts, underground contacts and stuff like that. They're unregistered firearms. I think the reason why these gun laws came in, it was because of the fact that they weren't firearms from a nefarious background. He went and bought them legally. They were registered. The bloke owned a firearm, at the time, a firearm certificate, and I think that's why they looked at it and said, right, we had these things in place, and this guy still carried this out, albeit there was so many warnings and red flags and all this stuff, and nothing was done about it. And now we've got how many ever dead? I mean, it was in the scores. You know what I mean? It was more than 10 children had been fucking blown away by this fucking fool, and therefore, again, it was at a time where, again, we were under the fucking under the threat of terrorism and things like that. And it was just too easy for these people to get firearms through the current laws that we had. So things went a bit overboard and ban this, ban that, ban this, ban that. And that's where we're at now. And again, it's the same in the States. If something goes wrong and it tends to, or it involves firearms, it tends to be the firearms owners of the United Kingdom that have all the lawful things in place, certificates and gun safes, that are ones to get punished. You know what I mean? And it's not the guys and the girls that are actually getting these firearms through nefarious means to carry out this crime. Again, it's a win-win for the police. They're getting guns off the streets and they're taking, you know what I mean? It's arrest numbers and look, we've seized these guns. Yeah, but you've seized these guns from an 80-year-old farmer, you know what I mean, that was going to hand those guns down. Yes, he might have had one or two more fucking shotguns than he should have had, but let's be honest, the last time one of these guns was fired was probably 1986, you know, because they're just his spare shotguns. But again, at the end of the day, they've got an arrest and they've got a number of seized firearms. It's the same over there. You know, you see absolutely stupid fucking arrests where there's like a zip gun and all of a sudden they've brought down this massive crime ring. You know what I mean? It's just fucking bollocks. So again, it's a fight that we're having over here, and I'm thankful to say that recently it's not been at the forefront that it is over there. I mean, we're as gunners in the UK, we're looking at Virginia and we're just going, guys, we feel your fucking pain and we support you 110%. You know, what's happening over there and in other places in the States, and all we can say is just keep strong. And it's really good to see again what we've touched on before in Virginia, where the march went ahead and there was zero arrests led up because of people walking around with firearms of all different natures. You know what I mean? There's guys walking and girls walking around with just the hunting rifles that they used on their land. There was a guy walking around with a fucking Barrett M82. You know what I mean? And nobody was arrested because of that. And that's good, because it shows you that the registered and responsible gun owners of America, or Virginia, are just that. They aren't the fucking idiots that put videos up on Facebook of them fucking shooting each other and stuff like that. And that's what we've got in the UK. And then it leads on to things like knife crime, that people are going, right, we can ban knives. How can you ban a fucking knife? It's a tool. How can you cut leather? How can you cut fish? How can you eat your food? How can you spread butter without a knife? It's just stupid, you know. And again, I've fucking waffled on about this God knows how many times on your shows. Knives aren't banned in the UK. There's reasons why we carry knives. There's a reason why you carry a knife. You know, if a 14-year-old black guy was carrying, or 14-year-old black lad was carrying a machete around South London, guess what that's not for? It's not for fucking clearing away vegetation, is it? You know what I mean? It's a stick in the head of another young black guy that comes from a different postcode from him. You know what I mean? It's a common sense thing, you know. And it just fucking winds me up that people think, oh, knives are banned, but again, it drives a narrative, because then you do get some ignorant police officers that don't know their jobs properly, that have come from different parts, and they see a young man or a young girl or a workman with a knife, and straight away it's like, this guy is carrying a knife because he wants to stab someone. No, he's carrying a knife because he's a fucking butcher, and he's walking from his house to his place of work with a butcher knife. And it's happened. It's happened to my cousin. My cousin is a plumber and gas fitter by trade, so he does a lot more plumbing. And what he had, he wasn't like a professional knife or anything. He just had an old shitty chef's knife that used to strip all the silicon sealant away. And he had his boot open one day with all his tools in his boot. He wasn't at work, and one of his friends is actually a retired police officer. And he walked up and he went, "John," he said, "what I'd do, I'd be careful about that." He said, "What?" Like thinking, "Oh, I've left my boot open." "Yeah, not a problem." He goes, No, you've got that fucking knife there. What you gonna, if someone stops you with that knife and they're gonna say, "Why have you got that knife?" You could get prosecuted. And I'm just like, why? It's a work knife. Again, it's that common sense thing. And sometimes, unfortunately, our law enforcement doesn't fully grasp that the same as it does over there, mate. So yeah, it can be quite frustrating again, but we know police officers on both sides of the pond that do have a very strong sense of a very strong common sense, if you know what I mean. Some that we know personally, And again, it's just frustrating that some of us have to fight that battle where you have to actually explain yourself when you're actually doing anything wrong. So again, I hope that dispels some of the myths of the gun culture in the UK, because we have actually got a very strong gun culture. And there's actually some surprising firearms that aren't 100% legal. Again, we had a massive weapons amnesty in the 90s because of the mass shootings and stuff like that. And let's just say not all of the firearms that should have been handed in got handed in. You know, no name, no foul, but I've seen Bren machine guns, I've seen Tommy guns, I've seen all sorts held by certain individuals. And these certain individuals aren't nefarious individuals. They're just individuals that enjoy firearms, enjoy shooting firearms, and maybe carried those firearms in conflicts around the world that they've served in, or have been handed down through family members. So again, it's like the Japanese said, to invade America would be crazy because there's a gun hidden behind every blade of grass. I think if anybody actually invaded the UK, they'd be, yeah, these guys have got no guns, they've neutered themselves. There'd be actually a very rude awakening, especially in certain areas of the country, especially if you go sort of further up north. You know, you get quite a nasty surprise. And I think that's all I'm going to say about that before I start implicating myself or anybody else.
Right. No, my point was like there was a guy I knew a while back. You may know him or may not. I can't remember if you do or not. But he's English too, and I'll never forget. He got approved to get an AR-15. And he was like, I'm getting a 12-inch barrel. I'm getting this. I'm getting that with it. And I'm like, oh, wow, so you're going to pay tax stamps and stuff. He goes, no, over here in England, if you're approved for a gun, you're allowed to have any size barrel, all kinds of things that are under the NFA over here, which is retarded. And that should never have been put into the law on barrel lengths. And you know, it doesn't make a weapon any better. As a matter of fact, the shorter barrel length makes it less viable. But they were saying because of concealability and this, that, and the other, all these bad laws usually come from one bad person doing a bad thing, and that affects everybody. And I think that's on both sides of the pond. And instead of going after the people who are actually part of the crime and dealing with them harshly, that's problematic. And so it's about policing, and it's about common sense policing, you know. But then once we now are in this computer generated society, and the greater point is, what used to be paperwork, let's say the sheriff's department, you went there and the sheriff knows you, you know them, you're an outstanding member of the society, your grandfather died, you turn in a gun that maybe he brought back from World War II, and, you know, he just didn't register it, whatever. Okay. What normally would happen is it would be paperwork, and then eventually the ATF would get it. And back in the 70s and 80s, early 80s, most of the ATF dudes understood that, and it would just be like, put it down on paper, this happened, and this guy had it, but he just turned it into the sheriff when his grandfather died. Instead of that happening, ATF would be on your ass. And it's a lack of, and honestly, I can't blame the street level field agents and stuff on it either. I can't be harsh on them, because federally, there's a lot of things, and I've experienced this, that you can't use common sense. You can't make that decision. You can't use your discretion. It's taken away from you because you're obliged. You're not obliged. You will make that arrest. And if you don't, then it becomes one of the Feasance brothers. We've talked about that before. Mismal and non-Feasance. And so that would fall under the heading of non-Feasance. You didn't do your job. And they would go after the policeman on that, or agent. And that's a fact.
And I think that's where it comes into, where it's just easier to target, arrest, prosecute, and compound the firearms of registered firearms owners, legal firearm owners that have maybe, okay, in a rush to leave the range. And we've never done it, but we know people who have, and just something like that, where they put a loaded firearm in the boot of the car, or whatever your local jurisdiction states, there might be some small subsection of some fucking firearm law that you can't do this, you can't have the magazine in the weapon, or whatever, and they get stopped because there's a tail light out, and all of a sudden, boom, there's a firearm in the boot. It's not secured, or it's whatever. You know what I mean? And it's like straight away, boom, we've got a felony here. Where normally it could be, can you do me a favour? I'm just going to turn away for a second. Can you actually put that firearm in that bag or in that box or whatever? But no, it then becomes a felony, and that's where these numbers get thing. And again, it's this narrative that gets driven, pushed by not the ground level, the cop or the federal agent or whatever. It's usually from governmental level, commissioner level, where it's just like make arrests. Let's get ourselves on the news to placate the masses. Look about gun control. We're doing this. Where Leroy or Abdul or fucking TJ down the street is actually fucking slinging nine millis left, right, and centre, Tech 9s and stuff like that. But it's easier to get Shuff, who's being stopped for a taillight out, and he's maybe got, I don't know, something on his. Or he's not taking his suppressor off his pistol for some reason. You know what I mean? Or he's got he's not concealed carry, but he's open carry because his shirt's being lifted up. Whatever, you know what I mean? It's easier to target you than it is the other ones. And just before I finish, Bud, if I can, just a little sort of like a little lighter tale about the National Firearms Centre. The lady that runs it, and I was there a year ago this week, the last time I was there, and she said the hardest thing that she's ever had to sort of import into the country isn't to do with a minigun or a Carl Gustav or a certain weapon. It's actually a bump stock from the United States that turns a semi-automatic firing into a Acme, you know what I mean, in brackets, fucking automatic weapon. And she says this little piece of plastic here is the hardest thing she's ever had to import into the United Kingdom, just because of, one, the bad press, and obviously these evil bump stocks, and just the cause of so many deaths in America, again driven by the narrative, and that's taken on then by governments and things like that. So she said it's taken up to 18 months to get this piece of plastic imported into the UK, and that's not attached to a firearm. It's bump stock in a plastic bag in a box. So it just shows you how crazy fucking things are. They can have a minigun within 3 months, but a piece of plastic that's got a spring inside it is taken so often. Something that you can knock out on a 3D printer in your bedroom these days, And again, that's another conversation, because that's just the next generation of improvised firearms. We can actually now download the fucking blueprints off a computer and knock out a firearm now within 2-3 hours. You know what I mean? And that's all I've got for today, bro, because I'm going to have to scoot.
Well, just to go off that tangent real quick before you bounce. You can do that with a rubber band on your belt, on the gun, or a belt loop. It's retarded, and it came from a lie, because there were no bump stops used in Vegas. Those were belt-fed machine guns. Anybody with any knowledge of machine guns knows that was a purpose-built machine gun, and it was a gun deal gone bad. Don't want to go revisit that bullshit, but it's just a fact of life, and that's what they don't want to face sometimes, are facts. Anywho, thanks for coming on today. Of course, the intro today was from Axion Ghost, Inside Enemy Headquarters. And with that being said, thank you guys for sitting on my big orange couch. I'll slowly raise the drawbridge while you finish your coffee, tea, soda, or adult libation. That being said, Shuff out.